Yesterday, one of the stories we mentioned was the Blake Anderson was on his way to being terminated, at least on administrative leave, and then that changed. A member of the athletic department, also a member of the football support staff, all of them. And then there was the story that Blake Anderson hired Tom Mars, who's an incredibly successful, popular, and respected attorney, to fight his cause. So we have Jay Katz, KSL. Does a great job covering Utah, BYU, Utah State, the whole state. Thanks for your time, Jake. Where is it today, and how much did this story rock Logan, Utah?
Well, it's about the same as it was yesterday, but yeah, it has absolutely rocked a lot of the news cycle up here in Utah because you have a sitting Division I head coach, and they have a report come out that he's been placed on administrative leave with the intent to terminate his contract. Yeah, and that we're a month away from the start of training camp. Yeah, it's pretty big news, no doubt.
Jake, so what details have you gotten other than the broad strokes?
Honestly, it's really kind of that. It's been pretty buttoned up in terms of getting information, but there were concerns with Title IX issues that are the main reason for the university opting to, as I mentioned, put him on administrative leave with the intent to terminate his contract. Now, he does have 14 days to respond to that. And you had mentioned that Tom Mars has been retained by Blake Anderson to obviously contest all of this. But it sounds like there was either a lack of reporting or a timeline on the reporting of Title IX issues that have really brought all this about at this time.
Jake, what's just the general feel from fans and supporters about Blake Anderson, amongst the Utah State faithful?
I think a lot of them are upset because this is a guy who's had a fairly successful run. Remember, when he got to Utah State, his very first year, he won the Mountain West Conference title that year. He's had a fairly successful run, all things considered, since then. He's obviously dealt with issues with the transfer portal and having a number of players take off on him with regards to his roster annually. But he had run a fairly tight ship, it seemed like, with this program. He had made some comments a couple of years ago about sexual assault and stuff like that ruffled some feathers, but the university had stuck by him, and apparently this latest incident was just a bridge too far for the administration to be able to continue to stand by him.
I mentioned the emotional ups and downs, and we know what Blake Anderson has been through personally with his wife passing away and then getting remarried. But there was a picture, and I thought it was pretty cool over the weekend. I saw him with he's 55. They just had a baby. He introduced the baby on his Twitter feed or Instagram, either one. And it's like, that's awesome. And then this, how weird was that? Not the baby, but just the turnaround on emotions.
No, you're no doubt. He's had a really tough run. You mentioned the fact he lost his wife. He also lost his son to suicide. He's been fairly outspoken since his son passed away about suicide prevention out here in Utah. And you mentioned the fact that he announced he had a newborn over the weekend. And to go from that extreme, this is like the complete opposite extreme. To go from celebrating a new little one in your family, and all of a sudden your job is very much on the line. And for all intents and purposes, I think Utah State is moving on from him.
Do you know, Blake, if this was an accusation about sexual assault, or is it something, Jake, excuse me, that perhaps it was a cover-up?
The statement from the university said that there was you mentioned the fact that they fired the associate AD, Jerry Bovee, as well as a member of his staff, Austin Albrecht. And in all of the statement about that, they indicated that there was a lack of reporting with regards to Title IX. Now, Title IX obviously is involved with a lot of sexual assault investigations and the like on university campuses. And so either, yes, there was something that happened, or there was just a lack of reporting. And Tom Mars, his statement also said that to try and fire and get away from having to pay a buyout to Blake Anderson by blaming it on him when it should have been his superior that reported this. So it sounds like there's some issues with regards to when something was reported, if it should have been reported elsewhere, who should have been involved initially. So it sounds like a lot of he said as they try to figure all this out, obviously, when it comes to the buyout, et cetera.
Jake, when Baylor went through the entire Art Briles saga about of course, similar issues, and that one of the things that was found out was that the university did not have really a good plan on how to do this. Yeah. Period. Like, not just for athletes, for any kind of thing that happened, and really poor training. Is that an issue here at Utah State?
I don't believe so, because like I mentioned, a couple of years ago, he had made some comments in a team meeting that got leaked out to the media about essentially the comment was, and I don't have it verbatim in front of me, but he essentially said it's never been more glamorous to be a victim of sexual assault. That was the comment he made to his team in a team meeting, and it got out, and it caused all kinds of uproar. And I think the university, quite honestly, has got a very good plan in place. They got a Title IX office, obviously, in place, and the people involved in that to investigate all this stuff. I just feel like that it may have just been yet another incident. The university said, you know what, we can't afford to continue to have this happen on our campus. We're going to move on.
All right, so I guess I haven't asked the obvious question. What's next? Who's in charge? Who's the interim? And how, we're talking about the edge of football season.
And that's the thing about this is it's a very, very tight timeline. It's Mountain West Conference Media Days next week, guys. I know that you're going to be out of Big 12 Media Days. Well, down there in Las Vegas. Well, kind of overlapping for one day on the Wednesday and Thursday is Mountain West Conference Media Days. Now, Nate Dreiling, the defensive coordinator for Utah State, is taking over on an interim basis, and he's a very highly thought of defensive coordinator coming over from New Mexico State. He's in his first year with the program, so they're turning the keys over to him for the time being. And I would expect, just with how tight this timeline is, the start of the season, it's seemingly just weeks off, he's probably going to have to carry this program through this upcoming season, navigate it, and then I believe that they will open a coaching search and start interviewing folks for that open position.
You mentioned Big 12 Media Days next week in Vegas on Tuesday and Wednesday. You also cover Utah. You also cover, of course, BYU. You're one of the first guys we got to know when BYU was brought up as someone entering the conference. Let's start with Utah. They were picked to be the preseason favorite. I'm not surprised by that. There's others that were in that mix. Your thoughts about Utah as they enter the conference?
Yeah, they should be the favorite, I think. Now, I know Kansas State was just one first-place vote behind them, and I think that's a fairly decent representation of the top of this conference. But Utah's got all the pieces. If they stay healthy this year, Cam Rising at quarterback, Brant Kesey at tight end, they're two big studs on offense that they missed last year in particular. If they stay healthy, there's no reason to think that they can't come in and compete for that conference supremacy. I know that there's going to be Big 12 fans who are a little bit rubbed the wrong way because of Utah getting all the love that they're getting, but this is a very, very good program. Kyle Whittingham has built an incredibly stable program up there. It's chock full of talent this year, and quite honestly, the funny thing is the first year in the Big 12 could be a big payoff year for the Utes as well.
For BYU earlier, we did it. We, put up a list. It's the summertime. There's always lists about coaches with a lot of pressure on them. Kalani Sitake, I believe, was third on that list. Where do you think he is when in terms of pressure?
There is pressure there, obviously, because this is a BYU program that's got a lot of history of success behind it. And obviously they've been working to be a member of the Power Four now, I guess the Power Five. But their whole goal going independent was to get to this level. And then when you go out and you start the season last year 5-2, it felt like it was inevitable they'd pick up a sixth win. But as it went, they lost 5 straight games and missed out on the bowl season going 5-7. So, yes, there is pressure this year to get back to the bowl season. I think 6-6 is the goal for this team. They were picked 13th in the preseason poll. I think it was a fairly decent representation of where BYU is expected to finish in this conference. But at the same time, it's an advantageous spot for the Cougars because I think there will be people who overlook them thinking, okay, if they're going to finish towards the bottom of this conference, what can we really expect from them? And that's a position that Kalani Sitake and his program absolutely relish. They love playing the role of underdog and playing spoiler.
We know about the rivalry, bitterness, anger, hatred, whatever, and maybe respect of Utah-BYU. Who is more excited about the other one being in the conference?
BYU fans having Utah in the conference. I don't think there's any argument about this. And I know that the social media representation can skew things a little bit, but knowing who I know up there at Utah, I think that they were very intent on sticking with the Pac-12 as long as they could. When it became very evident that things were not stable in that conference, they made the jump. And obviously that was going to be to the Big 12. So I think they're content being in the conference. I think they're very intent on competing and being a very productive member of the conference when it comes to competing on the field. But I think there's absolutely no doubt that BYU fans are more excited to have Utah in the conference than vice versa.
Yeah, we had, Bill Riley, voice of Utah, on earlier this week, and he just said it's the greatest thing. I mean, they'd love it, they'd be a part of it, and he tried to, and you've tried to do this too, Hans Olsen. We've had others Greg Wrubell, trying to explain the rivalry. Like you hear about Auburn, Alabama. Of course, there's Army, Navy, which is at a respect level, despite they both want to win. Texas, OU, whoever. But that this one is something that not enough of the country may understand their rivalry.
No doubt about that. The thing about it is this state, there are literally families who are split in terms of their favor towards BYU and Utah. There's the house divided. It's quite literal in this state. There are husbands and wives. One may be a Utah alum, the other one's a BYU alum, and they live the rivalry in their marriage. That's how deep this rivalry is in the state. Obviously, it's ingrained with the membership of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints involved in all of that as well. That's why it's called the Holy War, is the nickname for the rivalry. But guys, I do sports radio up here in Salt Lake. I've done it for 15 years, and I'll tell you, we have made, I'd say, a significant amount of money mining the storylines around that rivalry, and that goes back decades. There's no doubt about it. It literally exists 24/7, 365 days a year, and all you got to do is just search out a BYU or Utah fan, put up a question about something involving that rivalry, and you will see the fireworks explode.
So, comparing year after year, so when BYU joined the Big 12, a lot of the Utah fans would make comments, be like, oh, you're going to have a big headache. BYU's going to be a headache. You don't want them. And then when Utah, joined last year, the crosstalk between the two, I'm like, oh, guess who's got a headache now?
Yeah.
Was intense.
Yeah.
It was back and forth. And there were some particularly Utah fans that were just so put out by the circumstance that led them into the conference with the Big 12.
Yeah, and that's the thing about it. It goes back to this rivalry, guys. It gets downright petty at times. And it's the most fascinating thing to obviously work around it. And I grew up in it, obviously growing up here in the state of Utah. It exists literally in every facet of life. And there are very few rivalries that have that. You mentioned the Auburn-Alabama thing. There are some rivalries that are very much in that vein. But I'll tell you, BYU and Utah, it is unique in so many different ways. And yes, as the Big 12, I get to know both of these two playing each other annually in this rivalry. It's only going to get in terms of its popularity or its recognition nationally. It's only going to go up.
What was the reaction this week, Jake, about the interim in waiting at Utah with Coach Whittingham being so successful and somebody that could coach there, you would think, for as long as he wants?
Yeah, Kyle can essentially name however long he wants to be at Utah. You're right, absolutely, in that observation. But there was a time that Morgan Scalley, who has been named the designated coach in waiting at Utah, he had that in his contract before he had an incident where he used a racial epithet in a text that got back to a recruit's family. And then that whole thing blew up, and they pulled the head coach in waiting clause out of his current contract. Last November, they put it back in, and then obviously the timeline of it was late November. There was some thought that USC make a run at Morgan to bring him down to be part of Lincoln Riley's staff. So I think Utah was trying to ward off all comers by making him the head coach in waiting once again. But yeah, I know it blew up kind of nationally with regards to him being named as the designated successor, for lack of a better term, for Kyle Whittingham. But to anybody here in Utah, it's a very natural thing, because if you want to keep the continuity rolling at Utah, if there's as close to a thing as a like-for-like replacement with Kyle Whittingham, it's Morgan Scalley.
When Bill Riley was on with us, he mentioned Cam Rising, because that's like the but. I mean, he's a phenomenal player. Love watching him play, and he's had the injuries the last couple of years, kind of like Jalen Daniels at KU. What have you heard about Rising through the spring and where he is?
Well, let's put it this way. Compared to last year this time, it is night and day different, because last year they were saying, well, he's on a timeline and we're expecting him back. And then they pushed it into the season. They kept pushing it back. And it never felt like it was going to pan out the way that Utah hoped it was going to. But he participated as fully as he possibly could this spring in practices. Everything that I have heard is that he is going to be full go for the University of Utah this fall. And if he is as good as he's been previously, there's no reason to think he's not going to go out there and be an absolute star for Utah. And that obviously is a big reason why Utah's favored to win the Big 12.
Jake, have a great weekend. Will you be in Vegas, or what's going on with your coverage there?
Well, I had plans to make it, but let's just put things on the home front with regards to our radio station necessitated I got to stay back this time. But I was looking forward to seeing you guys.
Yeah.
But, hopefully it'll be a 1-year hiatus, and I'll be back out there in 2025.
Yeah, we want to see you soon. Thanks for your time. You've been great to get to know over the last 2 or 3 years. Thanks for your time. Have a great weekend. Have a great 4th.
You guys do the same. Thanks for having me.
Jake Hatch, KSL Salt Lake City, covers all of them, BYU, Utah, and the story from his perspective on what he's it's still kind of not so sure, but with what's happening with the termination of Utah State head coach Blake Anderson.